Welcome to episode 3 of the Cine Skill School video camera course, and this, guys, is arguably the most important episode of the whole course. Arguably, all right? There's a lot of important episodes. But in this one, we're going to learn all about our exposure settings, shutter speed, the frame rate, the ISO, the white balance, and the aperture, and how they all play into dialing in the perfect exposure. After all, that's the whole reason you bought a high-end camera like this, is so you can get manual control of those settings. On a phone, you're just limited to automatic exposure, and the phone is going to make up its mind as to the ISO, the white balance, everything like that. And that's why you'll get that white flash on the screen and that bright light as you change from indoors to outdoors when you're recording a social media video on a phone or something like that. We don't want none of that going on with a high-end video camera and production work, so let's not waste any time. Let's jump right in and learn how to dial in the perfect exposure for any kind of camera. Okay, so as soon as you power your camera on, you're probably going to be greeted by a screen that looks nice and simple like this, or you might see some toggle switches around and a little heads-up display. That's fine too. This is where some of those function buttons that we mentioned in the first video are going to come into play. On the top of my camera here, I have 3 programmable buttons that I can make do anything I want in the settings. So in this case, I have this one that gives me a nice clean display feed when I want it, and I can see no interruptions, no heads-up display. But before we go ahead and dive deep into the settings, let's understand what this heads-up display is showing, and they're going to look pretty similar for most cameras. There might be a couple differences depending on your make or model, but I'll go over them, and for the most part, a lot of this is going to be pretty consistent throughout. So what you can see is my case is I have nice grid lines set up so I can compose my rule of thirds if I want. I have a nice red highlight going on, and that is my focus assist feature, which your camera may or may not have. If it does, it's something that I definitely recommend using, especially if you're a beginner, because it's going to make pulling your focus super easy. As you can see, when I adjust the focus on my lens here, the red will move and shift, and it makes it super easy to nail your focus on the subject. Now, this camera here is more cinema oriented. If you have something that's more mirrorless or content creator oriented, it'll probably have autofocus. I don't have that feature on this camera. If you do, you can just tap on your subject and you'll get a nice clean autofocus. And there will usually be a dedicated button somewhere on the camera or on the heads-up display to toggle between manual and autofocus. Now, going across the bottom here is where we have some really important information and a record button in my case. In the bottom left, that's what's called a histogram. And you may have seen one of these before and you may be a little intimidated by this and not really understand what it's doing or what it's trying to show you. But it's really simple, and it's basically a more professional substitute for a simple exposure meter. So if you're rocking a Canon or a Sony mirrorless camera, in a lot of cases, they'll have an exposure meter right in the center on the bottom of the screen. And that's a little meter from -2 or -1 over to +1. The goal is to dial in your camera settings so that you get that meter to be dead center, and that's when you know that your exposure is perfect. The histogram gives you a lot more information, so that's what we're going to be using in this course. It's not that hard to use. I'll break it down really simply for you guys, and you'll see that it's really not that much different from a regular exposure meter that you might have on a more budget-oriented or YouTuber-oriented content camera. The goal of the histogram is basically the same as the exposure meter. You can see this giant mountain peak of data, and the goal is to get that as close to dead center on that chart as possible. So you can see that black gradient box that the graph is actually sitting in. You want to get the exposure to move to the left so that it's more centered, because right now we're a tad overexposed. But we'll get to that in just a second. This information here at the bottom is showing me my memory cards and how much data or time I have left to record on them. So that's super useful. And in my case, when I click on one, I can actually see all my clips that I've recorded. And this is how I can go in and format my SD card, which is something super important. Every time you complete a project and you want to clear off your SD card and start anew, you want to format it and make sure that the camera is reading it from a brand new format. On a lot of cameras, you're going to have to go and click your actual physical settings button and go somewhere into your settings to do that. In my case, it's right here on the heads-up display where I can click that bottom section and it brings me right to this screen here. I'll then go ahead and click up here. I can format my card, format SD, and I can set a real number. If this is the 3rd project I've done on this card, I would make it real number 3. And that way, in your data and in your files, you're going to have nice organized structure throughout all of your clips. And it makes it a lot easier to find everything when you get to editing. And over to the bottom right here is the audio levels, and you can see as I'm talking, they're bouncing up and down, showing that the mic is actually picking up sound. So that's the bottom of the heads-up display, and that's every feature that's basically going to be incorporated on most cameras. Again, it might look a little different, but for the most part, you should have similar functionality, and there should be a replacement for any of these pieces that serve the same function. So if you don't have a histogram showing, you should have a regular exposure meter. And if you don't have your sound waves showing, that's fine too. you might just have to toggle something in the settings to get a more detailed heads-up display showing, because your camera might default to something a little bit more simple and clean. So now at the top of my screen here is where I actually have the camera settings that are going to dial in my exposure. And that's the frame rate, the shutter speed, the iris or aperture, and of course the ISO, white balance, tint, and then I have battery life over here. So again, this is really standard for a heads-up display of any camera. It's showing your exposure. It's giving you a meter of some kind to measure that exposure. It's showing you your cards and how much storage you have left. It'll show you your audio levels. There'll be a record button on there somewhere. And then of course you actually have the battery life and all the settings on top. So before we go ahead and move into how to use the camera settings, the shutter speed, the ISO, what all of that means and how to dial them in perfectly, let's just recap quickly what is even important in terms of what we're looking at here. And I don't want anyone to get intimidated by a complex looking user interface. This one is pretty simple for the most part. If you're using a different camera, you might be looking at something different than exactly what I'm looking at, and you may feel intimidated by that. Don't be at all, because all I want to stress to you is that the only important things on this screen right now is the exposure meter in the bottom left, which we went over, and the entire top row of information, which is just your camera settings. And your camera also might have physical buttons to access those settings as well. You don't have to resort to clicking on the screen. That's just an option that you can do if you want to. Everything's usually right there on the heads-up display of the screen for you to go ahead and click. But if you want to use the physical buttons on your camera most likely has an ISO button or a shutter speed button of some kind. Mine has them all the way up here at the front right near the record button. But when you have things set up on a tripod like this and you're standing behind as a camera operator, it's a lot easier sometimes to just toggle the screen. You don't want things to move around. So that's really all you're looking at. You shouldn't be intimidated by anything on this screen. And you're going to see in a second how this histogram meter works.